Good morning from the kitchen. We're in the book of Judges, Judges 6, and we're studying Gideon again. And what I want to do is go through and do a little bit of a review with a very specific thing in mind. But first of all, let's read. And from verse 30 to, we'll see when we'll stop. Then the men of the city said to Joash, Gideon's father, "Bring out your son, that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the wooden image that was beside it." All right. Just note that they have a concern with something illegal that must be punished, and punished severely. But Joash said to all who stood against him, so they're contending with him. This is a legal dispute. They are pressing upon him the legal claims that this man, your son, has done evil according to our law code, and therefore he must suffer the consequences. So these are not lawless men. These are men intensely concerned with the law. But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by morning." So this is a counter offer. Okay, you say, right, we're going to kill your son because he's done wrong. I'm going to say, you are effectively saying that your God is nothing, that he can't even defend himself. Therefore, I'm going to put you to death as the keeper of this place. So there's a legal interaction here. If he is a God, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down. His altar has been torn down. Okay. Now, here's where I want to get to. Verse 32. This is going to be our crux verse. Therefore, on that day, he called him Jerubbaal, saying, "Let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar." Okay. Jerubbaal. We're going to think about Jerubbaal. One of the principles of interpreting the Bible is, what do the words mean? What do the individual words mean? And then in the context of a sentence, when they're put together in a certain order, well, what does that mean? That's the grammatical portion of the grammatical historical method. What do the words mean, and what would they mean in their historical context? All right. Jerubbaal or Yaribbaal. Yaribbaal. That's how I read it in the Hebrew. I don't really read Hebrew, but it's Yod, Resh, Bet. Something like that. So the center of this is Rib, Jerub, Rib or Rab, Rub or Rib. And this as a verb means to bring a case against. Or in the noun form, Rib means a lawsuit. Okay. So lawsuits, law, we were highlighting how these men who were seeking to kill Gideon, Jerubbaal, they were doing so according to a law framework. Okay. Again, they weren't lawless men. But in this passage that we've covered so far from verse 1 right up to 32, there are a series of lawsuits, contention, counter-contention. And we find the first and most crucial one, which sets the scene for everything, in verses 8 to 10. "And the Lord sent a prophet to the children of Israel, who said to them, Thus said the Lord God of Israel, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of bondage, and I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you, and gave you their lands. Also I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But you have not obeyed my voice." God was bringing a rib, a lawsuit, against the entire nation. So the Lord was operating inside a law framework. And according to that law framework, Israel deserved what it got. In fact, there's a whole legal document in Deuteronomy 28 which outlines what's going to happen to you as a nation if you don't do what God says. And if you do what God says. All right. So what we can note about that is that the realm of religion is the realm of law. The realm of religion is the realm of law. So these Baal worshippers were not lawless people. In fact, I don't think it's possible to be lawless. It's only a question of what law are you operating against. You can be lawless in terms of Baal. I'm lawless in terms of Baal. I don't want anything to do with him. I spit on him, which would be against the law, I'm sure. I'm lawless in terms of humanism. I mean, I don't respect these pronouns and coloured rainbows and so on. I'm not going to bow down to that. Well, this is blasphemy. This is heresy. And we see with, for example, the prosecution of the comic writer Graham Linehan by the wokerati, that these people take the law very seriously. They'll go after you according to the law. We see that with Enoch Burke. I don't know what to make of Enoch Burke and the Burke family, but we see that because he refused to call one of his pupils by a they, them pronoun, he's in jail at the moment. All right, pretty serious stuff. So it's law framework versus law framework. And beneath that law framework, there is a religion. And this is something that we need to grasp in our days. Again, it's not just these Baal worshippers were stupid people with rocks in their head that bow down to rocks. Well, no, that's not the case. They got something out of this Baal thing, or so they thought. And people get something out of following whatever the state and culture says, or so they think. Even though, how impoverished are we as compared to our predecessors in terms of the things that are truly valuable? All right. At least they could have a house to live in, a roof over their heads without breaking the bank. Okay. So religious framework, law framework, and a lawsuit. All right. So this sets the scene, verses 8 to 10. But if we go to verse 13, Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us?" Now, he's not saying that God is unjust, but he is pushing back. God is with you. Well, God is with us. If God is with us, then why have all these things happened if God's presence is with us? Okay. But he's answering, and he's maybe pushing a little bit back against God's words, not in a disrespectful way, but he's speaking in terms of that law framework. And today, I don't think we think of religion being, whether it be the religion of humanism of whatever flavor, the religion of Islam, the religion of Christianity, we don't think of it in terms of law. In fact, we do think of Islam in terms of law, but we imagine that Christianity is kind of a do what you like. It's about my feelings, literally about my feelings, about my state of peace. Do I have peace in my mind? Do I have peace in my heart? Just in a vacuum, in a bubble, floating along merrily. But no, that's not the historical point of view. Laws, it was very clearly seen that, in fact, a synonym for religion was law. So you could speak of the Jewish law, the Christian law. In fact, a portion of Viking inhabited land in England during the time of King Alfred, it was called the Dane law, because being Vikings, being pagans, they naturally had a different law. So previous generations understood things much more clearly than we do. And therefore they could see evil, they could confront it. And interestingly, King Alfred ended up having there was a mass conversion of the Danish people, the pagan Danish, to Christianity. and there was an intermarriage with the leader of the Danelaw and Alfred and his their families. Okay, which cemented the peace. Very, very interesting. Okay, so this legal framework goes on in, well, interestingly, Gideon's objection, well, why is it happening like this, was not answered by God. In verse 14, he says, "Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" So the Lord will patiently explain things, and as we meditate on God's law, he will open things up. But ultimately, his law is there to be taken and accepted. Just, this is the way it is, accepted. Not in an unthinking way, but God's answer was a word of command. You got to do this. Okay. And then we have verse 32, Jerubbaal, let Baal plead against him. Plead as in lawsuit, make a lawsuit, contend, bring a case. So that's something very, very much worth thinking of. What is the nature of religion? Well, even from the word religio, it is something that binds. Ligio, ligaments. It's something which gives structure to your entire body. And whether ligio and lex, the Latin for law, have some relation, I just don't know. Perhaps they do, perhaps they don't. Okay. Right, a number of other points. Now, we're going on to 33. Then all the Midianites and Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and this is part of God's fulfillment, the fulfillment of God's statement. The Lord is with you. And then in a very special way, through God's Holy Spirit, his presence was there when he needed it. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. All right. So Gideon, let's think of the trajectory in a few short verses. He goes from total obscurity, least of his father's household, the least clan. And furthermore, what is he doing? He's working, doing humble agricultural work in a winepress. Nobody sees him, but God sees him. Right. And now, somehow, we have all the men of Abiezer are behind him. These men who brought the lawsuit, where are they? Well, they're disgraced. They've got egg in their face. Or maybe they threw off Baal and say, well, obviously Gideon is the man now. He's the Lord's man. We're just going to follow him. Whatever. They're nowhere. They don't count. All the men rallied behind him. So he went from zero to being the commanding presence that all wanted to follow. In fact, not just in Abiezer, but in Manasseh, which was his clan or tribe, and then also Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali. So he's the head of, he's a commanding presence that's able to gather a force behind him. So where does this all come from? Well, it comes from the call of God, first of all. God called him. He said, by my declaration, you are a mighty warrior. That's who you are. So Gideon, in order to have this following, had to embrace that identity. He couldn't say, well, I'm not really like that. I just am a corn whipper. I'm not really, it's not me, Lord. Okay. He didn't say that. Okay, he accepted the identity that God gave him. And so we too have to accept the identity that God has given us. We are God's vicegerents on earth, to use a fancy term. We are to be a nation of a royal priesthood, that is, kings and priests unto God. That's just who we are. Thus saith the Lord. Let's embrace that identity. Okay. Secondly, he had to be in fellowship and communion with God. Okay? We too, we can't seek to lead men in our particular thing. Remember, if we follow the Lord, he will exalt us in due time to be king, not of the world, but king of our thing. That's the highest thing, the highest position we can ever aspire to on this earth is to be king of our thing. And this is what the Lord offers us if we will embrace the identity, be in fellowship with him. He brought this fellowship offering to God and it was accepted. So, but if you're in sin, if you're holding on to that sin, that dark, stinking mess that you think is great, gives you a thrill, it's filth. It'll put you in your grave. It'll take away all the joy of your life. It'll just suck it out. You'll be dead in a ditch. You'll be no use to man or beast, never mind the Lord. Okay, just be done with it. Be done with it. Okay. Also, what did he have to do? He had to consecrate his life. So he offered a burnt offering. That means total consecration. It's not a special sort of second blessing type of thing. Full consecration. This is kind of a Keswick movement that if you do this full consecration thing, then there's a whole theology behind it. No, just your reasonable act of service, Romans 1 and 2, is to offer your body, not just your mind, mind you, not just your emotions, your body as a living sacrifice to God. It's rational. It's logikos. It's reasonable, logical. That's what he did. Fellowship offering, the call, the fellowship offering, the burnt offering, and then what? Then, first commission, the first task. Now, the first task was immense. It was, practically speaking, enormously difficult. And note this, that from the very first implementation of the call, it was never a one-man job. Even at the very beginning, he had 10 people. Well, that's 10 more people than he had with him in the winepress. And we shouldn't be surprised as we seek to endeavor to embrace our calling that, well, it's not a one-man band. It's a matter of maybe a small group, maybe 10 people. And I think that's what the rule is for setting up a synagogue. We're not Jews, but it's a good rule. 10 people who would tithe would be enough to pay a rabbi. That's their thinking. It's a good thing to think about. 10 people, 10 commandments. Who knows what the numbers mean? But it was a more than one person. And then all of a sudden, in verse 35, blows a trumpet, and he has thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people, following him, and the eyes of many more watching him. But where did it all start? It all started far, far away in a foreign mission field where he was telling little people about Jesus. Well, no, it started in his house. The first call of obedience, the first exercise of his calling was in his house. And that's something to think about. It's easier to be a nice and good person, perhaps, when you're away, way far away in a strange place where people don't know you. But he was called to do this within his father's house. The Asherah pole and the altar of Baal was under the patronage of Joash, the big man of the village. All right, so it starts at home, and he'd just given a burnt offering, which says, I give my life to you. My life is totally yours. It's my reasonable act of service. And the Baal worshippers would have done the same. They would have prostrated themselves and said, I am totally at your service. Right? And then what was asked of him? What was asked of him was to forfeit his life, essentially. What he did, he knew the people of the city. He knew that he wouldn't get the job done if he had done it during the day. They would have just lynched him there and then. So, and we find in verse 30, that's exactly what they wanted to do to him. They wanted to just kill the guy right off the bat, so he wasn't wrong. And this, if we want to get it into perspective, let's think of the children of Israel by the Red Sea. They had mountains in one direction, mountains behind them, the the Egyptian army coming at them, and the deep blue sea in front of them. Impossible. So the Lord led him instantly to what should have been his certain death. And that's what the children of Israel were looking at, certain death. Let's walk into the sea, shall we? So he put him straight into the boiling pot, straight into trouble. He didn't save him from trouble. He saved him out of trouble. So this was certain death. And what are your fears about what will happen? I know I have fears about what will happen if I take up my calling. People disown me. People will think of me differently in a bad way, that I'm some sort of legalist or whatever. Well, what if they all come true? I mean, all of Gideon's fears came true. Well, they're just going to kill me. But he worked through that fear. He just obeyed anyway. He said, okay, my life, I've already given you my life. It's not mine. So logically, yeah, okay, I'll just go ahead and do it. He didn't know where his deliverance would come from. And perhaps the last person he thought might be the one to protect him would be his father. But who was it who protected him? It was the apex of the pyramid in terms of Baal worship. It was the man whose name was tied up with that particular altar of Baal. And perhaps you'll find that, yes, your worst fears will be realized. People will come after you. But I don't know what was going through Gideon's head, what he expected, how expected things to play out. But I expect he didn't have that in the cards. He didn't have that in the bingo card, you know. And who might the Lord use to deliver us from our worst fears? I mean, he doesn't have to, but often for his glory, he does. There's Hebrews 11. And let's not forget that Gideon is one of the heroes of faith. Let's not forget. Let's not be looking down our snout. Oh, he should have done it during the daytime, like a real man, like me. Don't be silly, all right. The first half, they all kicked the doors down. They took names. They had all the success in the world, tremendous deliverances. Another half, they're sawn in half. So God gets to choose. Are you going to be sawn in half, or are you going to work a great deliverance? That's up to the Lord. But that's the basic standard. That's the entry level. That's your regular entry level. That's just the reasonable, logical act of service. This is Easter Monday, as we speak. Easter Monday. Christ gave his life for us. It's not complicated. I don't have to draw you a diagram. Christ gave his life for us. And we are to respond to that by living a middle-class lifestyle and never rocking the boat and just getting our heads down and never saying anything or doing anything that would hurt anybody's feelings. Is that right? Or is it something different? You know it's something different. Our lives are it's just basic Christianity 101. That's why the early church had it so bad with the Romans, but it's also why they had such success. They are running rings around us in terms of their faithfulness, even though they had such screwy ideas about the Christian faith. They were filled with all sorts of weirdness, but didn't hold them back because they said, okay, Jesus died for me. My life is his, and that meant something. All right. So those are all things to think about. Last thing is courage. It all depended on courage. And if you demonstrate courage in your God-given field, in the exercise of your God-given responsibilities, you know what? People are going to be drawn to you. They're going to want to follow you. Because before this, Well, where was Manasseh? Where was Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali? They were totally defeated. They had their heads down. Oh, they were worshipping Baal, most likely. They were nowhere. There was nothing. There was no movement, nothing on the horizon. But with the courage of one man in the exercise of his calling, suddenly the situation is, it's not 180 degrees different. It's not 1% different. It's not 100% different. Well, how many thousand percent? It's totally revolutionized. It depended, it involved a whole crowd of people, starting with that 10. But the crux was a believer in Christ, the angel of the Lord, responding to his call, regardless of the cost. It's just not very difficult. This is why people are drawn to Rupert Lowe, whatever he might be. Is he a creation of the City of London? Is he just another Nigel Farage? I don't know, but he's at least showing courage when it comes to this political correctness. Does he claim to be any sort of Bible-believing Christian? No, he doesn't. He doesn't spit on the church, but which is quite different from other politicians. And he does talk about Christian laws and so on. But anyway, the point is that he shows courage and people are just drawn to him as a magnet. And perhaps we can say that in an age of weakness, of poor and low moral character, that when you show any real courage at all, people will just be drawn to you like a moth to the flame, only a better analogy. I hope you find that a blessing, and we'll see you tomorrow.